It is 10:15, and I know we got a full schedule today, and so if we could go ahead and get started. Take our seats, please. I know we're all adults here. I'm not going to require masks, social distancing. We're all adults. Just use your common sense, and whatever you feel appropriate, please do that. We also have on Zoom, Senator Angela Hill, and SRAB is Megan Boren. So we also have those present on Zoom. I need each member to check with Christy before you leave today. She has some paperwork for you to sign as well. And all the information that will be presented at the hearing today will be linked in our Zoom or website or however Christy figures that out for us. So that will be available. With us today, I'd like to recognize a couple people, 2 or 3 people. For the Lieutenant Governor's Teacher Advisory Council, if you go ahead and stand when I call your name, we got Betty Martinek from Western Line School District, Neil McCarty from Western Line School District, and Jennifer Pratt from Houston School District. Thank you for being here, and thank you for what you do. So thank you very much. This hearing or this meeting today is really to address some of the things that this committee has looked at and seen over the last few years. And so if you look at the agenda, you'll notice that what we're trying to do is get a clear picture of what our teacher salary schedule is, where it stands, what all goes into a teacher's salary, and things that we can do as a committee to improve it. We know we are good in some areas, we're deficient in some areas. And I think with the help of Lieutenant Governor's Office, with Leah and Christy, we've gathered some information, some documents for you today, some live testimony that's going to create or paint a better picture of what we need to do as a committee. And of course, all of this costs money. And we all need to remember that anytime we increase a teacher's salary, this is reoccurring money and not the one-time money that we have at this point, whether it be federal money or that money that's in excess of our revenue estimate. So with that, we've got several witnesses. We got from the Department of Education. We've got Pete and Dr. Gavin. We've also got DFA. Cindy Bradshaw is going to talk about our insurance, our state insurance, and some of the issues with that and things that we can do to make it better. For example, I live on the Alabama line. Why is Alabama's premiums half as much as Mississippi's premiums? And I think Cindy's going to address that. Ray Higgins, who is the executive director of PERS, is going to be here to talk about PERS, how it affects teachers. Is it a benefit for them? How could it be improved? Things of that nature. When it comes to PERS, this is not the committee that will be addressing PERS. We like PERS. We're not going to change PERS. All of the changes from PERS must, in my opinion, will come from the PERS board first. And based upon that, then the legislature can make some decisions. Corey Miller, our state economist, will also be present to talk about how we compare to other states. And then to wrap it up, we've got the Southern Regional Education Board, Dr. Pruitt, Lee Posey, and then Megan, who is on Zoom. And they are going to wrap everything up and kind of put a conclusion on what we've talked about today. In addition, you notice we don't have teachers that are testifying, but what I've done, about a month ago, I solicited any written testimony from teachers, business leaders, parents, administrators to provide comments. And boy, did they provide some comments. They all good. And if this book right here, they're all the comments that I've received, emails. I'm not going to give them all to the committee, but what we've done and what I've done is I've gathered about 10 of those emails that I thought were the most relevant and provided to each of the committee members. And so if you want access to the other ones, I'll have those in my office or they'll be with Christy. That's all I have at this point. I'll turn it over to my vice chair, Senator Blunt. Do you have any comments or remarks before we begin?
Nothing to add. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. So with that, our first witness, I guess, we're not in a cross-examination. We're here for information purposes only. We got Pete Smith, and Dr. Gavin, who's the COO of the Department of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to the members of the committee, thank you for inviting Dr. Gavin and me to participate in this very important hearing. We all know that teachers are the most important person in the classroom, and discussing giving them a bit more money is certainly a welcomed conversation. Mississippi has made significant educational gains according to the National Assessment for Education Progress, which is NAEP. NAEP is the only assessment given to all states by which states can be measured educationally. In 1819, the last assessment year before COVID, Mississippi was first in the nation for gains in 4th grade reading and 4th grade math, third in the nation for gains in 8th grade math, and fourth in 8th grade reading. These accomplishments would not have been achievable without the constant dedication and hard work of our classroom teachers. We always say we cannot thank a teacher enough. What they have done during this pandemic has been nothing short of extraordinary. They worked hard so that they could limit the learning loss of students. And they're certainly glad, and we're certainly glad that this conversation is being had today. And it shows them by this conversation that you have recognized all of their hard work too. So with that, the chairman also asked me to give a sort of a brief update on COVID in the classrooms. And so according to the Department of Health, during the week of September 6th through the 10th, there were roughly 1,885 new positive cases for students and 350 cases for teachers and staff. The total number of student cases since school began has been 20,635. And for teachers and staff has been just a little over 4,100. So as you can see, the Delta variant and COVID is still prevalent in our schools. Districts have done a fantastic job getting students back into the classroom for in-person learning, but the Delta variant is quickly spreading through our schools. So in August, the State Board of Education voted to allow districts to include a hybrid schedule, if you will. Remember back in 2020, districts had a couple of choices to be able to deliver modes of instruction. One of them included hybrid. As we were working to get kids back into in-person learning this fall, Delta kind of slowed that down a little bit. So the board voted to allow the hybrid option again. And in receiving information from the Department of Health, they're saying that roughly by the end of October, we should hopefully see cases decreasing. And then at that time, the board will take another look at this hybrid learning model to determine if it would be basically repealed or if they would need to extend it again. So districts don't know how many districts are taking advantage of it, but we did have a lot of feedback from superintendents saying that this was needed and welcomed. So I would suspect that a lot of superintendents and districts are taking advantage of the hybrid model, which allows them to offer in-person learning, have kids spread out so they continue to mitigate the spread of COVID. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Gavin as she will discuss the teacher salary.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the screen before you, you see the Mississippi Department of Education's vision and mission statement, and certainly what the information that we're presenting today is in line with the department's vision to create a world-class education system that gives students the knowledge and skills to be successful in college and the workforce, and to flourish as parents and students and citizens. The State Board of Education has adopted 6 strategic goals, and our teachers certainly fit into each one of those goals. On the next slide, you will see that the teacher salary schedule, you will see that on our next slide. Pete's trying to take me too fast here. You probably got to stand up here. There you go. Okay, on this slide, I know it's very small, but members of the committee, you have this in your presentation, but the teacher salary schedule is set by law. And as you can see in the slide that the teacher salary is based on their years of experience as well as the level of their license. You have a certification level of a level A all the way through a AA, AAA, as well as a 4A license. And all teachers that are employed on a full-time basis, they must be paid based on this particular salary schedule that is defined in law. Our teacher salary for teachers with 0 to 3 years of experience holding a single A license, their starting salary is $37,000. And Mississippi's 2018-19 data says that the starting salary for teachers is approximately $3,300 below the Southeastern region average. And the overall salary for teachers is approximately $8,200 below the Southeastern's average. And the next slide, just as an example of a teacher salary, this is an example of a teacher with 5 years of experience. You can see a teacher with a license of a single A, the salary is $38,375. And that's a teacher with 5 years of experience, and they hold a bachelor's degree. And all the way through a teacher with a 4A license, the salary increases to $43,990. And that's for a teacher with 5 years of experience. And if you take that same teacher, the next year, that teacher's salary is $38,887 if they have a certification level of an A. And built into the teacher pay schedule by law is a step increase. And you can see to the left, the step increase for single A license is $495 each year, all the way up to $794 if you hold a 4A license. And the next slide, we talk a little bit about MAP and how that formula plays into teacher salaries. So the MAP formula, as you know, is determines the amount of state funds that each local district receives. And teacher salaries are the local districts, they input that information into our management information system. And teacher salaries can be paid either through those state MAP dollars, or you have some teachers that are actually paid with federal funds. But as you know, the base of the MAP formula is the ADA, although there are other components that go into the MAP formula. The basis of that formula is average daily attendance, and that dictates how much money each district is allotted annually. In addition to state dollars, there are local supplements. And the term local supplement just means that that's the amount of money that a teacher receives over and above the amount that's allocated through MAP. Local supplements, they vary from district to district. They're not determined and they're not set in law how much those local supplements are. And we have some districts that pay nothing, and we have some districts that pay as much as $7,000 average for local supplement. On this slide, you can see how the local supplement plays into a teacher's salary. You have a teacher with 0 years of experience starting out with $37,000 as a base pay. And in this particular example, the local supplement for a single A license is $900. So that teacher's annual salary is $37,900. And if you go all the way up to a 4A license, you have a local supplement of $1,200, giving that teacher an annual salary of $42,808. And there are other teacher incentives. You have the national board certifications, and this is where teachers, any licensed teacher that meets the master teacher certification from the national board, they can receive an additional $6,000 in addition to their regular compensation. You also have the Mississippi Employer Assisted Housing Teacher Program, and a maximum loan of $6,000 can be granted to eligible teachers to assist them in paying closing costs with a house purchase. You also have teachers that you can receive up to $1,000 for moving expenses. And then the EEF card program, this is where teachers can receive additional funds to buy supplies for their classrooms. And you appropriated a significant more money for the teachers this year. So this year they were able to get $632 per teacher to buy classroom supplies. And that's up from about $405, I believe, the previous year. So. And then just a few other teacher incentives. We have the Critical Needs Teacher Scholarship Program, where teachers are awarded funds if they agree to teach in a critical shortage area. We have the Winter Read Teacher Loan Repayment, where they receive up to a year of loan forgiveness. And then we have the Mississippi Teacher Fellowship Program, where they also get reimbursed for tuition and books if they agree to teach in a critical shortage area. And that concludes our formal presentation. I believe we were.
Just one question. The Winter Read Loan Repayment Program, has there been any applications for that, or do you have the numbers for that?
I do not. We do have applications, but I don't know that exact number.
It's my understanding we've had a significant response for the program. Is that correct?
That is correct. I don't have the exact number, but that is correct.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions for members. Senator Hobson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Gavin. Let me go back to slide, I think it's page 5 or slide 5 that you put up with teacher salaries. And it indicates that our starting salary in Mississippi is $3,300 below the Southeastern average. And the next statistic has that our overall average is 8,200 below the Southeastern region average. What statistics were utilized to compute or to come up with that number?
This information comes from the South, and I believe you will hear from Dr. Pruitt later today, but that's the Southeastern Regional Average. They produced that report, and this is from the 2018-2019. And I know the teachers were given a raise this past year, but the other states also have increased their salary. So that's still pretty much in line with what the region's average is.
I do have several questions that I'd like to ask either Dr. Pruitt or Lee Posey, whoever's going to be here for SREB later today, but because a lot of my questions do relate to the other programs that are offered in the state and how they compare to other states. But back to that average, I've looked at the data that would show me what our starting teacher pay is in Mississippi, kind of our average tenured teacher pay and our long-term teacher pay. And it appears that our long-term teacher pay is very good. In fact, I think we're above most of the states in the Southeastern average. So if you stick around in Mississippi schools for, I think it's in the 30 to 35 year period, we passed a law several years back, since I've been in the legislature, to increase our long tenured teacher pay. So that's well above many of the states and above most of the states in the Southeastern average, I think. Do you know if that was computed into this overall average as it relates to that item 3 that I referenced earlier?
What the 8,200 represents, that's an average of, I think, on a scale of 0 to 34 years, the overall average, not just the start. And we're looking at across all years, across all certificate levels.
Okay. I just want to, and you may not be able to answer this, Dr. Gavin, I'm not meaning to put you on the spot, but I want to, as we go through this process today, I want to get to what I think is one of the issues that needs to be discussed more thoroughly. And that is, let's look at where we start our teachers. Let's look at our average tenured teacher, and let's look at what we pay teachers that have been here for a long time. Because I think the way that I assess the numbers, we're slightly behind in the way we start teachers. We're well ahead in the way that our long tenured teachers are compensated, and we're a good bit behind in our middle tier teachers. And that's something I think that needs to be discussed, because a lot of people throw out the statistics, so we're behind. But I think if you start breaking it down, you determine that we're actually really good in some areas, but we're not so good in other areas. And I think that's part of the discussion, Mr. Chairman. It may not be for Dr. Gavin or MD, but that's part of the discussion I think we need to have today is let's look at where we're competitive at all levels. And you know, maybe that hurts some areas more than others, but I think that's where we're trying to get to. I know this came up in discussion last year in appropriations. I think Senator Turner Ford even brought up the idea of some kind of getting to a Southeastern average, which I don't disagree with, but I think we need to break it down. I think the minutia matters here. And that's the kind of data that I'm looking for today. And as we start pushing this forward, because I do want to see our pay be competitive, but I want to make sure we don't hurt other areas of pay. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Dr. Gavin.
Certainly.
I think Senator Hobson, when SRB testifies, I think the picture will become, you'll see that in some documents that show that exactly what you're saying. It's the teachers coming right out of school to about 20 years or so that are having, the ones that have student loans, that are having families, that are having the problems. So if SRB is going to provide some information on that, I think that this afternoon. Any other questions? I'll start my left, Senator Wiggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this question actually may be what Senator Hobson is talking about, may need to be answered by SREB, but I'm going to ask it in the hopes that y'all can shed some light on it. As I sit here and having been on this committee for many years and appropriations and all, and I've talked to teachers and I talked to that, a number of conclusions come forward. And one of those is that teachers the ones that I talk to, painting a broad brush here, they go into teaching because they love it. Okay. And I think most of them understand where we are. We want to pay our teachers. If you also look across and I'll say the world, because if you look in places like the ones that we know are top, Finland and other places, they treat teachers as professionals. When I look what you've just described, and this isn't your fault, this is what the legislature over time has put into place. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, so you're just repeating what the legislature has done, right?
That is correct. The salaries are set
so
by statute.
So my question, what I'm trying to get at is for us to think outside the box. And so my question to you is, and I'm going to use an analogy, and I know people get tired of me talking about it, but I do. The Early Learning Collaborative Acts, we are top 5 in the country, but you know what? We had a blank slate. We didn't have 100 years of bureaucracy when we started that program. And you know what? The collective wisdom of this legislature and the leadership has placed Mississippi in the top 5 in the country because we had a blank slate and we used our collective wisdom. My question is, if you had a blank slate to attract and to keep teachers and reward teachers, what would it look like? And I'm asking you based on what you've seen in the profession and where we are. And I know that's a broad question and as succinctly as it is, but if we had a blank slate and said, we want to recognize our teachers and we want to do it at the highest level, how would we reward our teachers or how would we compensate our teachers?
I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think when you hear from Dr. Pruitt this afternoon, I know there's a list of several recommendations that they're presented in their report in terms of how we can attract teachers to the profession. But I think, of course, one of the greatest attraction is to pay the teachers, as you mentioned, as professionals. And I think we need to look around other states as we're doing, and we need to pay our teachers based on their level of professionalism. I think they're not paid as professionals in some of the industries.
So I would agree with that. And just to kind of, if you can build on that, when you're talking about the professions, and I'm saying law and medicine and engineering, you don't have the bureaucracy that you do in education. When I'm telling as a lawyer, I have things I got to abide by, but I'm a professional. I abide by that. The doctors, how can we get us to do that and release the reins and treat these teachers as professionals and pay them as professionals? I think part of that comes into a trust. If you're going to pay them what they're worth as professionals, we got to let them do it and not be bureaucratic about it. Do you have a comment on that?
I agree with that comment.
Okay. All right. Thank you then.
Senator Boyd?
Just a question. This afternoon, are we going to see kind of a breakdown of the average number of years of teachers in the classroom, where we kind of are on our teacher workforce as to how long they've been in the classroom or whatever? Or is that, are we expected to hear from that this afternoon?
We have the data. I don't think it's going to be presented later today. But we've asked for that data and we're collecting it now.
Okay. Okay, that's just something I would like to see as we're looking at this. The other piece of information, and I think y'all presented this before this term of this legislative session, is just what's the average local supplement? And then do we have kind of a breakdown of districts and to show that average local supplement as we're looking at things? So.
We do. We have a breakdown by district, what the local supplement is. And again, it ranges. There are probably 5 or 6 districts across the state that pay no local supplement. And there are some districts that pay all the way up to, I think it's about $7,400. So it range after you get from 0, I think the lowest is about $1,400, but it goes all the way up to $7,400
Okay.
annually.
Okay.
And we can get a copy of that to Leah to distribute to you if you like that schedule.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Boyd. Senator Polk?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Gannon, thank you for being here today.
Sorry.
Does the Department of Education and/or its board that manages it have an official stance on teacher pay raise? And if so, is that stance, do you have a recommendation of salary with that stance?
Pete, you want to answer that question? Do we have an official stance on what the teacher pay rate should be?
So that's not that's your question. That's not something that the board has discussed. We all know that teachers deserve to be paid more money. But the amount I would not want to say because we've not discussed that or had a discussion with our state board around that.
I'm sorry, could you speak up? You
So
stumbled off there.
I'm sorry. Yes, sir. There's not been a discussion around that topic with our state board of education. So I wouldn't want to put a number out there before having a discussion with them. But we do all take the position that teachers should be paid more money.
Next question would be, you realize that any pay raise we could give teachers has to come from some other agency or increase in taxes or more efficiency through the Department of Education. Would you agree to that? No. I wasn't asking you, Senator.
I'm not sure about the part about, well, I can speak about the MDE efficiencies. I'm not sure how that plays into the efficiencies of the agency, the compensation for teachers, how that ties into the efficiency of the agencies. But as far as the source of the teacher pay raise, I mean, that's not decided by the Department of Education. Of course, that's decided by you all.
And I agree with that, but we only have a bucket of money in the budget year. And any inefficiencies hurt that budget of bucket of money. For instance, a couple of years ago, your department had $1 million contract for some software. And it's my understanding that 2 weeks before that software was supposed to be implemented, there was a unilateral decision of some sort, and y'all decided not to use the software. Now, to me, that's $1 million that was wasted, unless you can explain to me why it wasn't wasted, that could have gone to teacher salaries. Would you not agree to that?
Any money that's appropriated to the Mississippi Department of Education for operations, that's not the same pot of money that goes out to the teachers. We have a limited, our budget to operate the actual office of MDE is less than 1% of the overall money that's allocated to the department for operations. 99% of that money flows directly to the school districts.
But if y'all had not wasted $1 million, that would have left the legislature $1 million that we could have given to teacher salaries. Would you agree to that?
I would not agree that we wasted $1 million. There was a circumstances centered around why we had to cancel that contract, and that money had already been appropriated to the state agency.
So y'all didn't waste $1 million developing software that was never used.
I would not agree that we wasted $1 million of the taxpayers' money.
Then we will disagree. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McMahon.
Mr. Chairman, I represent 4 great public school systems in an area of the state that's committed to public education. Public education is extremely important to me. And I thank you for your leadership, Chairman, to have this hearing. It shows courage in that we're willing to work with our educators across the state. I also applaud the Lieutenant Governor for allowing the committee to meet and discuss these important matters today. My question for Dr. Gavin, I would reserve my questions for later in the day if she's going to be available all day, because some other testimony may trigger or answer my questions. So Dr. Gavin, are you going to attend the hearings all day today, or are you going to be limited?
I have other meetings. I am limited today, but I am certainly willing to answer any questions that you may not get answered today.
Well, for as large an organization, oh, hold on. I want you to know that I've been on hold with the Department of Education since this meeting started. What do you think about that?
What were you trying, I'm a little confused by your question. Who were you trying to call?
Department of Education. I just dialed the number on y'all's website, and I've been on hold since the meeting began. I just hung up.
I can't speak to that at this point.
I would really encourage you to stay for the meeting today, or have a designee stay that can answer our questions. This is the day that we're here to do the people's business and to listen very intently to all the testimony. And I don't want to waste the time of this committee if some of my questions could be answered by other testimony. But I certainly want to reserve the right to ask the questions of you, or if you can come back this afternoon.
Well, I'm here at this designated time, according to Mr. Chairman, to address any issues that you have as it relates to teacher salaries.
There's a frustration among educators in this state that they're unable to communicate with the Department of Education. I get phone calls. I can't say it's weekly, but it's every other week, where educators, especially those that are moving from other states, that either they've moved here for a teaching job, or their spouse is here, so they came and they want to enter the public school system, and they're having problems getting their credentials. And many times I have to intervene, or these legislators have to intervene on behalf of constituents to get the certifications and the license, that's supposed to be issued within 30 days. That was the will of this legislature this year. We put some legislation, but that is not happening. What tools do you need from us for there to be someone that answers a phone when people call in, that the educators and the public can be helped by the Department of Education?
Senator, so we come to the legislature each year to ask for pens so that we can hire more people to work. We don't get pens to do that. We have now, and through the federal money that we've gotten, we're upgrading our ELM system, which is our licensure system, to be able to do more electronic work around that. We have 6 analysts who answer the phones that only have 6 lines. So if you're calling the licensure and all of the lines are busy or ringing, that's because they're on the phone helping other potential teachers or licensors. So we're adding more people through a contract augmentation with the Department of Technology to bring in more people to help answer the phone, but we're also upgrading the phone line as well. So we're taking measures to hopefully alleviate some of these concerns. But right now, if you only have 6 people to answer the phone with 6 lines, I don't know how we can, I mean, I don't know how we.
I'm encouraged. And first, let me say, Pete, I want to brag on your work because every time I've ever called and asked you to help me with a constituent, you have responded very quickly. You have, and I appreciate that. I respect that. I'm encouraged that you realize there is an issue and that you guys are taking steps. Thank you.
Sure.
That is a very reasonable response. So at least you are aware of it. You are now convinced, as I am, that we have a problem answering the phone over there. You're stating that for the record. You agree that we don't have the correct number of people to answer the phone to help people get their licensures.
So I would agree in licensure, yes.
Because I do believe that our teachers are professionals. I meet with them regularly. What they think is important to me. I want to be sure they have all the tools they need to educate our young people. I want to pay the maximum salary that the taxpayer of Mississippi can afford to attract, retain our educators. One of the things, sometimes it's not always about money. Yes, that's what we're here to discuss, but I want to put on the record that the Department of Education has made it very difficult for people to get their licensures when they're moving from out of state or when they finish school at our fine universities. They're having trouble getting their credentials in a timely manner. And you and I could discuss, some cases where it's been 3 and 4 months. Can't we? Where I've worked some of those together.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to put that on the record. And Dr. Gavin, I really wish that you would have your designee or you would attend the meetings this afternoon. I'm really sincerely asking you to attend. Thank you for your work, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions by members? I don't know. I'm almost, we'll see. Senator Bryan, I will recognize you.
At my age, the years run together and I get confused, but I think it was a couple of years ago, there was a teacher pay raise and the Department of Education had 3 different amounts that were provided to whoever it was during appropriations at the time about how much the teacher pay raise would cost. Is my recollection correct?
Mr. Chair, please, I didn't understand your question. Can you speak up a little bit?
What now?
I heard you say something about a few years ago, there was several different numbers.
There was, as I understand it, the legislature passed a teacher pay raise. And figures were provided by the State Department of Education about how much that would cost. Those figures were inaccurate. They were revised. The revised figures were inaccurate and they were revised yet again. Am I recalling that correctly?
If I can recall correctly, I believe that was maybe 2020. And I think part of the issue was who was all going to be included in the teacher pay raise. I think initially it started out with just the teachers, and then there were psychometrists that were added, and there were other professionals that held licenses that we went back and included in that. And then the other piece of that was, as one of our issues is our MSIS system, which is the student information system, is very antiquated, and we've come to the legislature for several years asking to increase funding for that, and you gave us 7.6 million to improve that system, to overhaul that system. But there were some system issues where teachers were coded incorrectly in the system, so we had to make some adjustments there. So there were 2 factors that kind of played into that scenario.
Well, I don't want to belabor the point, but I find it very disturbing that the State Department of Education has any difficulty at all computing how much a teacher pay raise would be, data entries into computer programs and all notwithstanding. And that's just an issue, and it's still an issue. And some of us consider it an example of how things are working at this Department of Education these days. I understand, Dr. Gavin, that you're here and Mr. Smith is here. Is there anyone else at this hearing from either the State Department of Education or any member of the State Board of Education that you know of?
Yes.
And who would those people be?
We have one of our board members here with us. Mr. McGehee is here.
Okay, so there's one board member here. And how long do you and Mr. Smith plan to be here?
How long?
How long do you and Mr. Smith plan to be at this meeting?
Or we were planning to be here for our designated time.
Well, what is your designated time?
If I look at my schedule, I believe it says to 10:45 maybe, or 11 o'clock.
But in other words, when you finish with your presentation, you and Mr. Smith intend to leave, and there'll be nobody from the State Department of Education at this hearing the rest of the day. Is that correct? Other than one board member?
That is correct. We were planning
you.
to be here at our designated time.
Believe me, I understand that you are terrified that you will actually be here at a time other than the time you were asked to appear. That just as a matter of course, that the Department of Education would have someone here to sit through this hearing and observe it. Believe me, Dr. Gavin, you've made that abundantly clear. Now then, regarding the figures about teacher pay, I observed that you were comparing teacher salaries in Mississippi to teacher salaries elsewhere. But there's no comparison between teacher salaries and other jobs. And I want you to help me with my math because I get confused and get decimal points wrong and all that. But once upon a time, $15 an hour as a minimum wage was sort of a fringe position. But one of the things that's happened certainly recently is that wage levels in general are dramatically increasing. And in many places, $15 an hour is a de facto minimum wage. But taking $15 an hour is I calculated, 40 times 15 would be $600 a week, and 52 times that amount would be $31,200 if I've done my math right. Does that seem about right?
I didn't do the math. I don't have a calculator and I didn't do it in my head.
Well, I didn't have a calculator either. Thank you. But it seems to me that one thing that we might keep in mind is comparing the salary of $37,000, I believe it is as a starting salary to a wage of $31,200, which one would get at $15 an hour. I would just ask members of the committee to think about salaries that people earn in other areas, salaries that are being advertised in manufacturing, salaries that are being paid in the construction industry and on, and compare those salaries to teacher salaries. Compare bank tellers' salaries to teacher salaries. I had a teacher who taught a very long time. And after she retired, she worked briefly as a bank teller. And the third of the month came up. And this was back when all the Social Security checks came in on the third of the month, and they actually had checks. And then there was the first of the month, and it was a weekend. And it all came together one day. And the other tellers at the bank were absolutely exhausted because of all of that work that had piled up for that one day. And it was a very busy day at the bank. My former teacher, who at that time was retired after teaching 30 some odd years, had a different standard for what a hectic day was. And so I think that we need to keep in mind that when we're talking about teacher salaries, one method of comparing them would be to compare to what salaries are in other fields, what the current salary scale is going to, the amount of training that is required for being a teacher and the increasing wage rates that we're facing across the board. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree that our teachers deserve significant compensation for the work that they do in educating our children and preparing them to go out and take these other jobs that we're talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bryan. Senator Delano.
Thank you, Dr. Gavin. Earlier in this hearing, there was some discussion about details for local supplements. And I would like to piggyback on those comments, and some of the things that I would like for you to help me locate is, first of all, your website has a lot of school reporting and data and reports that can be generated by district, and that's very helpful. And if I am missing some of the reports that I'm actually requesting, if it's available, please let me know where I can find that when we get finished with this hearing. But that being said, what I would like to do is to have a breakdown, a kind of more granular scope of data for districts and what is defined as local support. And I would like to know what amount of money each individual school district is giving to base salaries or as a supplement to base salaries. And then the local supplements that are given to individual types of teachers, whether it be STEM teachers, chemistry teachers, or is it kind of broken down? And I know that a lot of districts do it differently. I would just like to have some level of knowledge of how many teachers are receiving those supplements within those school districts and what those amounts equate to. So it's not an overall average, because I think the average would be skewed greatly by a bunch of zeros or teachers that don't receive it. But I would like to know what types of teachers are receiving additional supplements above and beyond what they get from their local base salary amounts. Does that make sense?
It does, and we can supply you with the local supplement by district, and it will be broken down by the level of their license and their years of experience.
From the district side?
From the district side.
So you won't know if those teachers or what classes those teachers are teaching. You will just know that there's a teacher that is being paid a supplement.
That's correct. And I'm not aware of the information that we have. I'm not aware of the supplements being based on the subject area that they teach. I'm not aware of that. I'm not saying it's not true, but the schedule that I can provide you, it has the district and the amount by license type.
Okay. I've spoken to several school districts superintendents that have told me that they've had to increase their supplements to get STEM teachers or computer science teachers to come to their school district or to keep them there. And I just want to know what that looks like. So somebody's got to have.
Okay, we can research that.
What they're offering teachers for these supplements for these critical teaching areas. So that's what I'm trying to get down to. Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Delano. Senator Jordan. Senator Jordan, if you could get a microphone, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow up on that same question. I noticed that most of the districts will pay more for chemistry teachers, mathematics teachers, and English teachers, because it's in some instances, with some districts, it's hard to find physics teachers, chemistry teachers, and mathematics teachers. And they may get this supplement. It varies, depends on the district, how much they want to give. But those are the ones that are hard to find that they pay more money to get. Am I correct on that?
And like I said, we can research that and get that information to you, like if there's
That's
by
been the
district, if they pay more, but there is a national board license that teachers with the national board certification
Yes,
They
ma'am.
can get an additional.
I understand that,
6,000.
but in some rural districts, it's very difficult to find the teachers that I had reference to, especially science and mathematics.
Yeah, and we have increased, I think the number of critical shortage teacher district has probably doubled over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yes,
So
ma'am, I
that is a true
understand.
statement.
I understand. I just wanted to know what those would be the first that you would pay supplements, additional salaries, additional amount of resources to.
And again, that is set by each individual district. There is no state law or there's no mandate by the board that
They pay
how
what-
those local supplements are determined.
Yes, ma'am. I know that they do varies, but they have been doing that for years.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jordan. Any other questions? Senator Poole?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. In the conversations between Mr. Smith and Senator McMahon, it was brought out about not having enough people at MDE to do the job. Seems to be kind of the bottom line. Dr. Gavin, how many total pens have you been allotted for the Department of Education?
I don't know the exact number of pens, but I know we were cut about 20 pens this past year.
But you don't know how many pens we allotted?
I don't have that number with me,
How
no.
many employees do you currently have, active employees do you currently have on payroll,
We have roughly 500 employees,
roughly?
roughly.
You don't
And that
have an
includes
exact
school
number.
attendance office. We have a little over 300 at the central office here in Jackson. But we also have school attendance officers that are stationed throughout the state. That's part of MDE staff. But we have 320 plus employees in the local building here.
Okay. So would you be plus or minus 10 on that 500 number?
I'm sorry.
Would you be plus or minus about 10 employees on that 500 number that you stated first?
Roughly, yes.
Okay. And what is your total allotted payroll amount for this year?
Our total budget that we have to operate at MDE is roughly 20 million.
Roughly 20 million. More than 19, less than 21.
I don't have that exact number with me, but we can get that to you.
Well, I can
99,
get
and
it.
we only keep about 0.1% of what you allocate to us. The rest of it goes out through flow throughs and through to the local school districts.
Okay, that was, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Senator Boyd?
I apologize. And my question earlier to somebody, the beauty of technology is they pointed out my question wasn't quite clear. So let me go back and ask this question again. In looking at teacher salaries and teacher retention, because we all want to see salaries increase, but I also want to know too, have y'all done any analysis where we looked at across the state where we see retention really dropping with teachers? If we see that they teach for a number of years, how long that is, and if you see those, attrition rates, if you see retention, if you see there's, we see, like, for example, do we see a lot of teachers getting out of the profession at year 7, year 8, whatever that is? Have y'all done any long-term analysis at the department kind of to help guide us and look at those particular issues?
I can't speak directly to that. Mr. Smith, do you have any information on that? I know that's one of the things that the task force has looked at, but I can't speak to specifics.
Thank you.
Yeah, not recently. Before I had this position, I was with another office, and there was an analysis done and for 0 to 5-year teachers, and it was determined at that time, and this has been 10 or 15 years ago, that teachers left the position around, or left the office or the position around year 3 for whatever reason. And so I don't know of any latest studies, but like Dr. Gavin said, I think the task force, with the governor's task force, did take a look at that, and we'll look into dive into that task force report to see how we can help with some of these analysis.
Okay. All right. I'll look forward to kind of seeing that data.
Thank you.
Senator Wiggins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, again, and I want to follow up on the question I have, and I'm going to ask either Pete or were y'all to comment on this, but Mr. Chairman, you referenced the emails from from people, and I want to quote here from one of the emails from the superintendent, because I think it goes, in fact, it does go to what I've heard and what I've been told and haven't seen this. And I'm quoting here: "I quickly realized just how hard teaching is. A good teacher has to be many things: a step-in parent, a counselor, a master of content, a good actor, a comedian, an organization specialist, a disciplinarian, a role model, a nurse, a motivator, and an innovator." They said, they talk about the education major candidates. Believe me, there's a huge difference in a traditional education program graduate versus a non-traditional route candidate. Simply put, many of the people we now are hiring did not go to school to be a teacher. They lack the pedagogical skills as well as adequate teacher internship training. Education is repeatedly bashed and blamed for the ills of society. Everyone expects teachers and schools to fix the societal problems facing our kids and families, teach the kids what they need to know, even though education is not valued in the home, and do it all with a salary that barely allows them to meet their needs. And then from one of the other emails that I think puts it in context, quote, "We need a paradigm shift to see educators as we are now, not as volunteers or second wage earners, but as fully independent and capable professionals deserving of more than a basic living wage." What do y'all, that's passionate, and that's what I was going to, do you have a comment on that?
Other than, I hear the same comments, Senator Wiggins. So, and I think that's probably part of why this hearing is going on, is to determine what we can look at or what you guys can look at to help make teachers pay as competitive as possible and quite frankly, as professionals. So,
But, and my last question, but pay alone is not going to solve what these people are writing in these email, is it?
Probably not, no, sir.
And what was brought out in one of these emails is that we continue to hire people who are not teachers, as they say, or are parallel. And this person's bringing out that we need to do other things. So thank you for what you're doing. Comment.
Thank you.
Senator Hobson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I didn't intend to ask any more questions, but there was one issue that was brought up with respect to there've been a lot of questions about Department of Education and operations. And I just want to clarify one thing, or at least I think offer a little bit more insight as to Dr. Gavin, one of the comments about the number of pens that have been cut. Now, those pens had all been vacant for 180 days or more prior to that time, correct?
That could be correct, but those pens also allow us some flexibility in terms of, since we're not allowed to upper escalate, we have no flexibility in terms of hiring staff at a certain level.
Well, if you got pens that are sitting vacant for half a year, it's probably because either somebody's not pushing it or because somebody's trying to use those funds to pay other people in the department. Would that not be correct?
I don't necessarily agree with that. There could be many reasons why those pens remain vacant.
Well, I didn't hear any efforts. I didn't hear any comment when the department came to see me back in the discussions of the budget about the need to keep any of those particular pens open for particular reasons. Did you talk to me or anybody talk to me about that at that time?
I don't know if there's, Mr. Chairman, any discussions about the reasons, but we always ask when we come over to for additional pens to hire workers.
You know, we had a lot of discussions about a lot of things the department needed this past year. In fact, I think we gave you all the money you needed for the new MSIS program. You did mention that, and I think Dr. Gavin correctly stated that, I couldn't remember the exact number, 7.6 million to an entirely new MSIS system that will help the state, help not just MDE, but help all the districts in inputting and processing information. And the pins that we understood that were not filled and that were removed. And you understand, you've been around long enough, you understand the reasons that you don't leave those pins sitting around. Those nobody discussed that with me about some pins that needed to be kept open for some particular job. These are jobs that hadn't been filled in 6 months. Is that not correct?
Yeah, so I can't answer that.
And that could be correct. I mean, it takes a while sometimes for us to process pins, but a perfect example of needing additional pins is right now that we've been allocated all of ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3 dollars. That's a tremendous amount of work that the agency is going to have to take on. And so we don't have a pins to be able to hire to do some of that work. So, and that work is going to go on for the next 3 years. So there is additional work that's coming to the agency as a result of, and we appreciate the funds, of course, but there is additional work that the agency is taking on now that we're having to take on with current staff because we don't have additional pins to hire additional staff to process some of that work.
Okay, well, there's some additional things in the ESSER funds too, but this is a long discussion. It's probably getting way off the topic of what we're here for today, but I just want to clarify some of the statements that have been made in response to the operations as I appreciate it from the appropriation standpoint. But thank you again for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Boyd.
I've had a question from a House member that's on the Education Committee in the House, and he's written in to ask if he's getting a lot of questions, and he's wanting to know if you can provide information of what's happening in other states, what's being done to compensate teachers that are having to do now both online and in person, and because of students being out with COVID, and if they are using additional funds to compensate teachers who are having to do both jobs and any type of working overtime, if y'all could provide that information.
We don't have that information necessarily by districts, but districts are allowed to use some of their ESSA funds to compensate teachers. And we're seeing that, and it's really a local decision on how they do that, but they do have the capability and the ability to use some of those funds to compensate teachers accordingly.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Boyd. Any further questions by any member? All right. Dr. Gavin, I think you've taken in a lot of information today.
Thank you.
Some suggestions, some maybe some improvements. I would ask that the department as well as the state board look at providing us some guidance on what they think is appropriate for a teacher increase or restructuring or whatever you as the board to deem appropriate. We're looking for any suggestions. We're not trying to leave anybody out, and you have a unique point of view from your department. And so we would hope that you would be engaged with us like you have been in the past as we go forward in this process. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up. I see Lieutenant Governor walk in. I'd like to recognize Lieutenant Governor Hosemann. He's been very involved in this process and very involved in this hearing as well. Governor, do you have want to make any comments this morning? Like I said, you've been involved, and I thought might be appropriate. Thank you. Thank you, Governor. Next up, we have Cindy Bradshaw. Ms. Bradshaw is she is a state insurance administrator. And the reason we've asked Ms. Bradshaw and PERS here is because it's not, when we look at salaries for teachers, we look at not only what they're receiving, but what they're having to pay out as part of their salary, insurance premiums, PERS contributions, taxes, things of that nature. So we've asked Ms. Bradshaw. She's very knowledgeable on this subject, and I think she's got some good information for this committee. So good morning, Ms. Bradshaw.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman DeBar.
And
Lieutenant
if you could
Governor.
pull that microphone close to you so we can hear you, please.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to come before the committee and offer some information about our health insurance plan. I am Cindy Bradshaw. I'm the state administrator for the Department of Finance and Administration. Started in this role in January. I spent many years in the private sector with health insurance and was asked to join the state team in 2012 as the deputy director. Based on some of the comments that y'all had previously during the previous session, I just kind of wanted to mention that since I've been in this position with the state in the last 10 years, we have focused on efficiency and controlling costs as much as possible. We have reduced our staffing from 21 employees down to 17 employees. And we've also implemented a lot of cost containment strategies that saved over $100 million for the plan. This is something we're real proud of. So I also have with me today Lynn Townsend. He's the actuary for the plan. He's been the actuary for the board for over 25 years. So I think collectively between the two of us, we should be able to answer any questions y'all may have. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I think most of the information y'all have available to you. And Chairman DeBar, I think the answer to your question is primarily on slide 25. So we'll try to get there pretty quickly. The state plan started in 1942. The school plan started in 1991. The plan became a self-insured entity in 1994, and the state and the school employees' health insurance plans were combined in 1999. The State and School Employees Health Insurance Management Board was established in 1997. They were given the authority to determine the rules and the regulations governing the plan. They define the scope and the coverage that's provided. We also do competitive bids to secure vendors to help manage the plan. We have a strategic plan that is posted available on our website. And the Department of Finance and Administration's Office of Insurance provides the administrative support to the board. By statute, our board members are listed here. Primarily, they are all ex officio members. So we have eligibility is determined by statute as well. This slide shows the various entities that are covered under the plan. You may notice that school and local municipalities are not eligible to participate in the state plan. Again, it is self-insured. Self-insured means that the state assumes all of the risk for the claims. The premiums are paid into our office. Blue Cross and Blue Shield is currently the TPA that we have in contract. They determine eligibility, maintain enrollment, they process claims, and they also manage a network to help control cost. So the plan does not receive any direct appropriations from the state. We bill the agencies based on the eligibility that they have available. So currently we have about 193,000 covered lives. The breakdown on that is about 109,000 are active or COBRA participants and about 52,000 dependents. Our dependents have increased pretty significantly since we implemented a copay for office visit services about 5 years ago. We also have about 17,000 Medicare retirees and 8,600 non-Medicare retirees. Back in 2006, A statute was changed to really classify two different types of employees. We have a legacy employee and horizon employee. The classification by that is determined by the hire date that an employee started with the state. If they were ever employed full-time with the state prior to January 1 of 2006, they're considered a legacy employee. If you were hired after 2006, you're considered a horizon employee. So, and that's very, that really plays a factor when you retire. Currently by statute, retirees for legacy employees can only be charged 15% more than what the active rate is. If you are a horizon employee, you're charged the actuarial value, and you can see later in the presentation the difference between the rates on those two categories. So we do have two different coverage types that are offered. We have a select coverage and a base coverage that employees may select. The base coverage qualifies as a high deductible health plan. A lot of the benefits that we offer under the base plan are dictated by the Internal Revenue Service guidelines. And we offer that as free coverage for any employee, whether you're Horizon or Select. The premium for individual coverage is $0 for the employee on that. It does qualify as a high deductible health plan. Members can contribute money to an HSA account for tax purposes, although the state does not contribute anything to the HSA accounts. The next slide just kind of shows a breakdown of the legacy and horizon employees and the coverage that they have selected. We have just recently gotten to the point where we have more horizon employees than we do legacy employees. And this is significant in that it will reduce the OPEB liability that the state has, which I think is currently about $779 million that all the various agencies has to book as a liability on their financial statements. As the horizon and population increase and legacy decreases, that amount should diminish. So just wanted to talk kind of briefly about the base coverage that we offer. The base coverage, again, is the high deductible health plan. It currently has an $1,800 deductible. That deductible has to be satisfied by the patients before any benefits are provided. And so after that deductible is met, for network benefits, the plan pays 80% of any other services that one may have. The only difference in the deductible is that the Internal Revenue Service a few years ago did allow us to offer some first dollar coverage on some preventive medications, like routine medications for blood pressure and diabetes. And those can be paid at the pharmacy copays after a $75 pharmacy deductible is met. Any other medications are only paid after the $1,800 deductible is satisfied. So the next few slides are just some more information about the coverage that's offered under the base plan. All of these services, whether it's office visit, hospital services, lab work, is all subject to the deductible and then pays 20% co-insurance for the member. So pharmacy benefits, again, you have to meet the $1,800 deductible, and then the copays apply. We have a generic copay of $12 for preferred. Non-preferred is $30. We have a brand copay of $45. Non-preferred brand is $100, and specialty medications are $100. These are the same copays that we also have on the select coverage. So the next option that members have, and which is the most popular one, is a select coverage option. On this option, we have a network and a non-network deductible. Network is $1,300. If one elects to go out of network, it's $2,300. We have a co-insurance maximum, which is $3,000. And then a family deductible of $2,600 for network. One of the differences in the select coverage is that we do have a $25 copay for network physician visits. Any other office services that occur during that visit, or we pay 80% of those services and the deductible does not apply. We also have a primary care visit, an online primary care visit that we utilize telemedicine services for to encourage members to use that modality. We do have a $10 copay for that. We also have online behavioral health services. Hospital services are all subject to the deductible, and then there's a 20% co-insurance. To discourage emergency room use, we do have a $50 additional copayment on emergency services. And then any subsequent emergency visits are subject to a $200 copay in addition to the deductible and the co-insurance. We also offer 100% coverage on some preventive wellness services. We cover annual doctor visits for testing and lab for preventive services for items that, if discovered early, can be treated and reduce costs later on. We do cover the maternity care at 100% for members who participate in a maternity management program. We cover new wellborn nursery care at 100%, and child office visits and routine tests are 100%, as well as immunizations. Pharmacy benefits. Yes, sir.
Senator Jordan, if we could wait until the presentation is over, if you don't mind, please. You'll be the first one. We come back to you, okay?
So the pharmacy benefits on the select coverage are the same, except for there's just a $75 deductible that has to be met at the beginning of each year before the co-payments apply. We do have the same co-payments. Another component of our health insurance plan is our health and wellness program. Is called Motivating Mississippi, Keys to Healthy Living. And we have this program to encourage people to live healthier lifestyles. And a lot of the services that we cover in this category are also covered at 100%. We provide a weight management program, tobacco cessation program, maternity management program, and then disease management program, in which members can get coaching through an online nurse. We also have Worksite wellness coordinators. We have a contract currently with Active Health Management. We have 4 wellness coordinators that are strategically placed across the state. Their function is to work with the employer units to promote health and wellness and activities at all the employer units. This next slide shows our 4 top chronic conditions that we have, and you can see we have the plan costs that we have for 18-19, and then for 2020. You can see there's a huge jump in the amount of money that we've spent in these top 4 categories between 19 and 20. This is primarily due to the drastic increase in cost of medications, as well as to the increase in utilization. We have more and more members in our population that are developing chronic conditions such as diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and arthritis and cancer. So our premiums are calculated in that there's an employee portion and then there's an employer portion of that. The state pays the full amount for employees that select the base coverage. If employees choose the select coverage, the premiums for that, if you're a legacy employee, are $20. If you're a Horizon employee, it's $41. Employees pay the full premium for any of the dependents, and the retirees pay for the insurance costs themselves for the premiums. For legacy employees, there is a cap on theirs that's 115% of the active employee rate. And for any Horizon employees, you must pay the actuarial value of the cost of that insurance. This slide shows our rates for 2021. You can see the employee contribution For legacy on the base is zero. The state contributes $389. On the select plan, the employee contributes $20. And again, the state contributes $389 for each one of these coverages. Active employees who select the Horizon pay $41. This next slide is the rates for retirees. You can see in this slide, there is a big difference. If you're a legacy employee and you retire with single coverage, you pay $470. If you're Horizon, the rate is $739. The difference in that, again, is the difference between the cap of 115% and the actuarial value. So there is a big gap between the rates for the legacy and Horizon employees. So I'm going to let our actuary review these next two slides. That just kind of go through the historical overview of the financial position of the plan. Lynn?
Good morning. So if you look at this slide, these are the historical premium rate increases. You know, back in the early 90s, we had really big rate increases several years in a row. Then in the early 2000s, we had rate increases basically every year. And then if you look at the last 10 years, last 3 years we've had.
Sir, could you pull that microphone up? I'm having a hard time hearing you, sir.
Yeah, sorry. So if you look at the last 3 years, including 2021, the year coming up, we've had 3% rate increases 3 years in a row. But that followed 7 years of no rate increases. And we've really had very few rate increases since 2006. So if you look at the next slide, this is a historical financial overview of the plan. Shows revenues and expenses for the last 11 years. If you drop down to the total gain and loss, CY20, we had around a $33 million loss. That followed 4 years previously with losses. So we've had losses 5 years in a row, 20 million in 16, 25 million in 17, 40 million in 18, 44 million in 19, 33 million in 20. We expect this year to have around a $50 million loss for calendar year 21. We expect the surplus to be around $63 million at the end of CY21. Now, I'll point out a couple of things here. If you look back at CY10, administrative expenses were around $54 million. There are 39 million in CY11. Made a lot of changes in CY11, but some more in CY12 and later. Now our administrative expenses are $33 million a year. They've been averaging, $33 to $35 million a year for around 10 years. That compares to 54 million of administrative expenses back in CY10. We had a big run up in surplus beginning in CY10, CY11. Reached a maximum in CY15 of 274 million. It's going to be around 63 million at the end of this year. And the board several years ago came up with a surplus objective, a surplus funding philosophy of trying to maintain at least a half a month's extra expenses over and above having met all prior accumulated liabilities. So this year, we expect that surplus to be around 63 million at the end of CY20, at the end of CY21, at the end of CY22, with the rate increases that are going into effect next year, that's surplus is going to be around 35 million. So that's what we expect. That's really close to that surplus objective. We've been drawing down that excess surplus for several years now, but we're having to have rate increases to offset those losses to keep it from going into the hole. I guess that's the extent of that slide.
So I just think some of the key takeaways is that you can tell from 2010 up to about 2014 or 2015, we were able to save a good bit of money for the plan. We went through a complete cycle of reprocuring our contracts. We tweaked those. We were able to save about $15 million on our administrative expenses. We implemented the Blue Card program for Blue Cross and Blue Shield, which gave employees access all across the country to network providers, which saved about $68 million in that 1 year. We've also renegotiated our contracts with the hospital. We were able to get Gulfport Memorial in the network, which saved about $10 million to the state. And so during those years, when we were implementing all these cost control strategies, we were saving money. We were actually, making a little bit of money on the plan. So then we get to the next couple of years and we get to the place where the healthcare costs are increasing to the point that the amount we were collecting in our premiums was not enough to cover the claims that we were paying. However, we had this nice dilemma of having this extra chunk of money in our reserves, and the board made the decision, instead of increasing the rates every year to be in line with what our trend was, that we would just use that excess money to be able to kind of supplement what that premium would be. So we were able to go, for 7 years without a rate increase to use up that money, because the board certainly understands there's a lot of competition for state dollars. Why ask for money if you have an adequate surplus? The dilemma that we're in now, though, is that we still have this big gap between how much it's costing us in claims and how much we're collecting in premiums. And we're slowly trying to kind of land the plane without having a big crash at one end. And so, behind the scenes, we continue to work on cost containment opportunities. Again, one of the big things that we were able to do during this time period was to implement the office visit copay. We do annual surveys for employees, and that was always one of the number one requests that we had in the surveys, was to have a physician office visit copay. We had presented that to the board a couple of years as a benefit change, but the estimate on it was about $12 or $14 million. And so when we developed the surplus, then the board felt like it was the right time to implement that change. We continue to get requests to add a office visit copay for specialist visits. Again, due to the cost of that, we anticipate could be $15 to $16 million. The board has not elected to do that. And one of the reasons why, aside just from cost on that, has been we want to encourage employees to develop a relationship with their primary care doctor and to have that doctor channel all of their services. And so I think most people in this room know of somebody who all of a sudden gets an abdominal pain and they want to immediately go to a GI doctor instead of going to their primary care doctor, or they develop a rash on their hand, instead of going to their primary care doctor, they want to go see a dermatologist. And so we really want to encourage people to go to see a primary care doctor before they go off to a specialist, and to have their primary care doctor do the referral, although that's not required. So slide 25, Chairman, I think this may answer some of your questions that you have. And so this is a chart that shows the active employee rates that we were able to obtain. These are 2020 rates. So you can kind of see this has a breakdown on what the total cost of the premiums are, and then it shows how much the employee has to pay and how much the state has to pay. So you can kind of see with Mississippi, the state pays $378. However, Mississippi's premium cost is at $418. The employee only has 40% of that. And the biggest difference is in the family coverage. So the same for us, the employee has to cover the entire dependent coverage. However, if you look at Alabama contributes about $1,000, a little over $1,000 to their coverage. So they're subsidizing the dependent coverage.
And I'm gonna exercise chairman's prerogative and break in right here. Why is it, looking at that, we have the lowest total cost, but yet the employee share is the highest? And then right next door, Alabama, it's the lowest employee share.
So
what are they doing, or what can we do to to reduce that cost, or is it the coverage of insurance we have? Is it the decreasing reserves? I don't know. What can we do to help that cost?
So with that, are you referring primarily to the family coverage? The family coverage primarily? I mean, it kind of just boils down to appropriations. That the state of Alabama contributes, like for teachers, they contribute $800 a month per employee. So they are allowing that $800 to cover the employee, and then they're subsidizing that dependent coverage. So whereas the state of Mississippi is contributing roughly $400 per employee, if you look at these other states, the state, Florida is contributing $713. Georgia's contributing $575. Kentucky's contributing $646. So one of the things I think is also important to note is, like the state of Alabama, that $42, they've all, in this calculation, their premium's actually closer to $150. They give employees credit for being tobacco free of about $50. And if they participate in a wellness program, they get a $50 reduction in their premiums as well. That seems to be the case across the board with a lot of these other states, that they are subsidizing the dependent coverage a great deal more than what Mississippi does.
And this is, if you're a brand new teacher making $37,000, and $750 is a lot of money. What would it cost the state of Mississippi to double the state share for our teachers? Do you have any figures on how much it would cost, maybe per teacher or for our teachers in this state, if we wanted to increase that share, the state share?
Yeah, we'd have to do a little bit of calculation. I think Chairman Briggs could give us some insight as to how much we're contributing now and then double that.
Well, that just, this plays into part as to everything a teacher has to pay. And I guess this applies to all state employees.
Yes, sir.
But we're focused on this committee on teachers right now. So if a teacher's paying $726 a month, plus they have a $3,000 deductible for a family of four, it's hard to survive. And it's no wonder why they're leaving the career field. And so any advice going forward after today that you can provide this committee as to what we can do? I know it's an insurance committee and maybe it's outside our purview, but I think it's important that this committee be aware of all the expenses that are going, any reductions or deductions that are going to a salary. So thank you, Ms. Bradshaw. Is there any more questions? I know Senator Jordan, I told you I'd recognize you if you have any questions. I can come back to you. You could speak into the microphone, Senator Jordan.
Excuse me. It was about the immunization for children's, right, on that page when we was talking. I had a question on that. Does that apply? Let me get to the question. Oh, yes, here we are. Back on the select coverage options. Well, children routine immunization. That cover what on the immunization? That cover all that.
Jordan, if you could speak into the microphone, we can barely hear you.
That cover all that the child need in order to enter into the insurance,
Yes, sir.
whatever they are, whatever the immunization is required. Okay,
sir.
that
It
doesn't include what we're going through now, does it?
It does. We're paying.
It does
those at
include
100%.
Cobart.
COVID vaccines are paid at 100%. Flu vaccines and additionally are paid at 100%.
All right, that's what I want to know, was Cobart 19 included.
Yes, sir.
And your statement is, it is included.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sir Jordan. Ms. Bradshaw, did you say that premiums will be increased next year again as well? Or
The board voted for a 6% increase.
a 4 to 6% increase?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Senator Wiggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to go back to the point you picked up on, what I picked up on, which I think is a huge, huge issue back on page 25 and the premiums. And our teachers, to keep it to that, as far as I know, many of them have a family, and many of them are probably the single breadwinner. Okay. And I did some quick calculations to your point, Mr. Chairman, and under the plan, and to your point, Alabama, under the family share, is the employee, quote, only pays 18% of the total family coverage. In Louisiana, it's 40%. Mississippi, of course, is the highest at 65%. Then you have states like Florida, which is 10%, and Tennessee, by the way, which is 20%. So the numbers reflect what the chairman is saying. Now, I'm no actuary and I'm no person or within that community, but what I do know is it comes down to negotiating contracts with the health providers. For as long as I've been around, Blue Cross Blue Shield's been the only one that we've had available. So I guess my question is, I would disagree that it's an appropriation. I submit that it's probably what's being offered to us by different groups. So I guess to put it in terms, has it been looked at to go to Aetna or to go to Cigna or somebody besides Blue Cross where they can offer family benefits at an affordable rate? Because what I'm seeing here is they're being offered in every other state besides Mississippi. And our family, and then as I'll put on my former Medicaid chairman hat, if you're looking at and you can only afford the employee, guess what? Your children are being put on Medicaid. So we're increasing the cost of Medicaid because under CHIP, all our kids are covered under Medicaid. We want them on private insurance. So all of that being said is, to the chairman's point, what are we doing and what is the board doing to address this family coverage to attract teachers who have families that they can provide family coverage for their families?
Right.
There's a lot in there. So if you can unpack
So
that.
I guess, first of all, let me just address with Blue Cross and Blue Shield, they don't determine our rates in terms of rates and the reimbursement that we offer to the providers. We have reduced the allowed amounts that
Well, wait, because I need to understand. Okay, if it's not a function of what's being offered, then how come every other state is able to provide family coverage at an affordable rate, and Mississippi, the employee has to cover 65% of family coverage?
So again, I think that maybe if we look at the total cost of what the family coverage is, the total cost of coverage for Mississippi is $1,100. The total cost of family coverage in Florida is $1,700.
Okay.
The total cost in Arkansas is $1,500. So we're not at the high end of what
Going
family.
with the cheap plan.
Well, I think we have an efficient plan.
Well,
I mean, I think
okay.
we're able to offer insurance to state employees at a cost that's much less than what other states have. The difference is how much the state contributes for that employee's insurance benefits.
Okay, fair enough. And so based on
Senator
the
Wiggins,
numbers.
I think Senator Hobson's probably got an answer to your question. If I could recognize him real quick.
Okay, but let me just finish. So to that point, in my numbers, the state's quote only covering 35% of the plan that we're offering, whereas other states are covering much more.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the easy way to understand this is that our family plan is not as rich as other states' family plan. Our employee-only plan is very rich. So I think that probably, Cindy, I may be
Well, I
trying
think
to
the
oversimplify
benefits are
this.
the same.
But yeah, the numbers, the total cost you look at, we're we're not bad, but when you look at what the state pays for the employee only, it's good. When you look at it for the overall family, it's not as good. That's
Agreed.
probably the short answer.
And thank you, because I think that's very succinct, but I think that's a policy decision we have to consider if we're talking about attracting teachers who generally are family oriented. Okay. This, from what I'm looking at in the numbers, that's a cost prohibitive. And I don't, if that's a decision is that a decision made by the legislature or by the board?
Yes, sir. That's a policy decision. So we offer the insurance coverage based on the premiums that are determined. And so it's in our statute that we don't subsidize the dependent coverage.
Okay, well, then this is why we're having this hearing, Mr. Chairman. Maybe that's something that we need to look at. And yes, that may be a cost as an appropriations member that we have to be willing to consider if we're going to attract families. But I can tell you from looking at this numbers that when you're competing with our neighboring states and the pocketbook, I mean, I have 2 kids, you know, I know a lot of people who look at this when they're deciding on their plans and what the premium cost is. And Mr. Chairman, I would just, with that being said, I think we would, if we don't consider that, we would not be doing our job. So thank you for allowing me to explore that.
Thank you for your question, Senator Wiggins. Senator Blunt.
Ms. Bradshaw, thank you for your presentation. You've given us a lot of details, but it seems to me that takeaway is that when we, as it relates to teachers, when we look at how we pay our teachers in Mississippi, and we saw the numbers earlier about how we rank behind our states, our neighboring states and our other southern states in terms of salaries, that we're further behind than we appear if you consider the situation of a teacher who is supporting her children, covering her children on health insurance compared to other southern states. Is that fair to say?
That is a true assessment.
Okay. So I think we've appreciate this is the big picture, and I'm glad we heard from you on that. The larger picture I see, though, as it relates to teacher pay, is I think that we've got a committee here the last 2 years that has really been working to reach a bipartisan broad consensus on the big questions. And the first big question is we want to raise teacher pay. And I think what we're doing today is to figure out how to do it. So how would that work? And most importantly, how would we pay for it? And teacher pay, teacher salaries, teacher insurance is funded through the MAEP program, the Mississippi Adequate Education Program. If you look at the most recent budget, the line item for the MAEP and the line item for the revenue that the state collects through the state income tax is almost exactly the same amount of money. The state collects about $2 billion a year in income tax. The state pays about $2 billion a year in MAEP, which pays teacher salaries. The most important thing we can do to fund the increases in salaries and to improve the insurance rates for teachers with families is to protect the MAEP and the general fund and the income tax that pays for it. And everything else that we discuss leading into January, into this session, about how to do what we all want to do here relates to protecting the general fund and protecting the income tax, which is the same amount of money. If you eliminated the income tax, the state and funded everything else in the general fund, level funding, the state funding for MAEP, which pays teacher salaries, would be virtually zero, would go from 2 billion to zero. So if you want to do these things that we all want to do, and because we're in state government and we balance the budget, we have to protect the revenue side to do what we need to do on the expenditure side with health insurance, with raise and pay. And we can't lose sight of that. These details are important. This is much more complicated than people think, which is why we're having this meeting. But to do all the things that we want to do, Senator Hobson has to balance the budget and he has to have the revenue to pay for it. And 1/3 of that revenue, $2 billion, comes from the income tax. And everybody needs to know that. So we can do these things. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blunt. Any further questions? Senator McClendon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank y'all for being here. On our health plan, do any of the agencies that are listed here have a separate plan or additional benefits than anyone else? Say school districts, community colleges, public libraries, universities?
For health insurance?
Yes, ma'am.
Not that I'm aware of.
Can we do that as a state, single out, say, teachers or school districts?
Senator, I believe other states have done that. That is an option, but I don't know how much of a viable option it is for Mississippi, based upon the funding and things of that nature. I think we just wanted to get a picture of what is coming out of a teacher's salary and what type of disposable income a teacher has after all the deductions have come out. So, but I think that's a viable question, a good question, but I just don't know that it's something that's viable for our state at this point that I'm aware of.
I was wondering if it could be dissected.
So if I may, at one point they were separate. There was a separate plan for the school systems than there was for the teachers, and they were joined and made one plan. I do know the state of Alabama has two separate plans, one for their teachers and one for their state employees. You know, I think the one thing to keep in mind with that is if you do separate them, then you have duplicated administrative fees and costs associated with those plans. So, for example, we spend about $35 million in administrative services to administer the plan. So it could, in essence, if you separated it, have that administrative cost separate that's going to have to be divided up among just the teachers. It could increase the cost.
My next question, do we have an average age or compared to other states?
I don't have it compared to other states. Our average age is about 43 to 44.
What was it?
43 to 44.
Okay, thank you.
One last person, Senator Delano.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to make one comment real quick regarding our PBM, our pharmacy benefits manager. I still get complaints from my local pharmacist who's trying to deal with our state plan with Blue Cross and Blue Shield, getting proper payments. And we fixed general law, but we gave you an exclusion for that. And I'm not blaming you for it. I know that's part of the plan, but just please be aware that the legislature does watch that. And if there's an opportunity to come back at a future date and correct that loophole, I would certainly be in favor of doing that, because what's being done to our local pharmacists is unjust and not fair, common business practices. But that being said, the other thing that I wanted to go to is back to our salaries, or excuse me, our cost share for single coverage and family coverage. And I'm going to ask you for something specific. I would like to get a number of looking at just the employee share component for single coverage and the family coverage. If you would calculate the average from all of these states, and then give me a number, what is that number? What would that number equate to for the employee share under both coverage plans? And then what would it require in additional state support to bring our plan up to those using those same averages? So in other words, there would be a charge to the general fund because obviously the state share would go up significantly, but I would just like to know what that cost would be for the general fund to bring our coverages up to the average of these other states.
And for clarification, is that for all state employees, or do you want that just for teachers?
Both. I'm curious to see what the delta would be on or for teachers versus the rest of the state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Senator Delano. Senator Bryan, we're running behind, so you got a quick question?
Just in relation to the question Senator Delano was asking, is our plan more or less generous than the plans in the other states?
When we did this comparison, we looked at the benefits for each state because a lot of states offer multiple plans. So we selected the plan that was most in line with our select coverage. We use this as the select coverage, not the base. So this is our the lower deductible plan with the physician copay. And we compared it to the one that was closest in line with our benefits.
Well, I mean, this is too complicated to go into now, but I noticed that as I understand it, the out-of-pocket limit in Mississippi is $13,000. And if you're looking at someone with an income of $40-something thousand, telling them they can have a $13,000 a year medical bill, and then telling them at the same time they've got health insurance, I'm not sure they feel like that's a very useful health insurance policy.
Yeah, so the 13,000 is for family coverage. And the out-of-pocket limit actually came into play with the Affordable Care Act. That was a mandate from the Affordable Care Act that we didn't have before. And I can tell you as a result of that, what we've seen is exorbitant cost in pharmacy benefits. When the lifetime max amount was eliminated and this maximum out-of-pocket was put in place, we saw an instant increase in the cost of medications. And a lot of that was driven by before, when we had lifetime max, there was pressure on the manufacturers to keep their costs low. Now they know, and what they're doing is, I mean, we have medications for cholesterol that, used to be $50 a month that are now $14,000 a year. And so they're getting these prescriptions, and the manufacturers are offering patient assistant coupons where the patient's not paying any of that $8,000 out of pocket. And then they may charge us $200,000 or $300,000 for the prescription. So there's no pressure on the manufacturers now to keep their costs reasonable.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Bradshaw. I appreciate you coming this morning and providing some testimony, some insight. It seems like if you all are providing the best available plan for our teachers, the only way to reduce their share or their costs is for the legislature to appropriate more money, which I don't know. We wanted to hear that this morning, but I'm glad we did, because now we know where we're at. We can't fix something if we don't know the answer to it and the issue to it. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I think we'll move on to our next witness, Mr. Roy Higgins from PERS. I do apologize for being and running over. We've allotted you, I think, half an hour. Take your full time, if more. We're here to listen to you, and we appreciate you being here. And just please ensure you speak into the microphone. We have people on the video trying to hear.
All right.
And I spent too many years on a flight line, so I'm going deaf. So I need you to speak loud and clear for us, please. Thank you.
Certainly. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. Certainly appreciate the chance to be here. Appreciate the chance to visit with you. We always want to be available as a resource, and always available now and afterwards for anything you need. And look forward to talking with you this morning. I also will say it's great to be back in person. Of course, certainly respect the need to be safe through the pandemic, but I think the last time I was here was in the early parts of 2020. So it's great to be here and great to be in person. I also have two other PERS team members here with me. One is Ms. Devetta Lee, who's our counsel and policy advisor, also serves as our legislative liaison. And then also Lisa Green, who is a deputy administrator for benefit services. So hopefully we'll be able to answer all your questions today. And if not now, otherwise, afterwards, we always want to do that. I know today is primarily about benefits and about teacher benefits, but I hope to do a little bit of an overview just to narrow it down fairly quickly. I realize too that I think I'm between all of you and lunch, so I'll try not to be too long-winded, but again, hope to cover some good information. One, we are a traditional defined benefit pension program, pension fund, and it's much like it sounds, a defined benefit. that's based on your years of service and your average compensation, not necessarily how much you submitted. This would be compared to or contrasted to a defined contribution plan, which would be more like a 401k plan. And we were constituted in our current form in 1952. We also administer several other plans and programs, including the Supplemental Legislative Retirement Program, the Highway Patrol System, the Mississippi Deferred Comp, ORP, and the closed municipal systems. We're governed by a 10-person board of trustees. I want to talk a little bit, though, and remind you, and I know the folks in this room know this, but talk a little bit about the importance of PERS. And I often share that in the terms of dollars and in the terms of people. In the terms of dollars, very important to the state of Mississippi. We pay out about $2.9 billion in retirement benefits each year. Just to put that number in context, that's roughly half of the state general fund. I know that's a different set of numbers in a different bucket, but just for context, so $2.9 billion that goes throughout the state. We send that, to hundreds of financial institutions, other states, even other countries, but please report that over 90% of that stays in the state of Mississippi, and that money ripples throughout the economy, creating a multiplier effect, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in state and local tax revenue. But it's also important in the terms of people, and it's important to remember the people behind the numbers. At over 300,000 in total membership, that represents about 10% of the state's population of direct contact, not even counting family members. And from my standpoint, it's good to remember, and I share this with staff, that financial analysis, actuarial analysis, things like that will always be an important part of our job. But it's important to remember those people behind the numbers, the teachers that educate our children, certainly that we're talking about today, but also public safety, nurses, public servants such as yourselves, and others. And I think we all can remember that key teacher that, our coach that had an impact on our lives or whatnot. And from my standpoint, I'm a product of public schools in another state. My children go to public schools here in Mississippi. Our youngest is in the 3rd grade. Certainly know how important that grade is. And I also learned in 2020 that maybe I need to continue on with my job here at PERS or talking to you folks instead of trying to help tutor at home. So we certainly appreciate our teachers, and it's just important to remember the people behind the numbers. As far as our funded ratio, it's at around approximately 61%. That's a common metric in the public pension industry. We've hovered at around that point for the last several years, and that's basically comparing our assets to liabilities. And then to give a little bit of an update on FY21, most of the information in your packet and that we have published is as of FY 2020, the new CAFR, the new comprehensive annual financial report and the actuarial reports as of FY21 are not yet available, but I do want to give a little bit of an FY21 update. And I would just say that as the world dealt with the adversity of the pandemic, economic and otherwise, I think we can, as members, we can take pride in PERS. I think Mississippi PERS showed its resiliency throughout that, not only in responding to it, and certainly commend and appreciate the staff for continuing our benefit operations, but also we were able to rebalance our portfolio and have a good investment return as of FY21. It was 32.71% as far as the gross return. To my knowledge, that's the highest on record. It exceeded our benchmark, and we compare favorably to peers. Now, in the same breath, while that is great news, I would say that we shouldn't be surprised that happened. All we did was do what we were supposed to do. The board has a strategic asset allocation policy. They maintained their governance throughout the pandemic and allowed us to carry out the strategy, and I commend the staff and the advisors for doing that. I'll also say too, in full disclosure, that due to the nature of our portfolio, when times are good, we may look better than others. When times are bad, we could look worse than others. So just, to share that, knowing what's behind the numbers. And of course, I need you all to remember that in a few years, if and when that may happen. And I also will say, as good a news as it is too, that it may not alleviate all of our long-term considerations. So I think it's always good to be preparing and monitoring and planning for the future, and remember our long-term focus. And then just lastly, even though I know today's committee is not about this, we do hope to propose some legislation this year to give us a little bit more flexibility on some of our investments that we think will help the fund, but more about that in the future. So this is some key information, some of which I just covered, so I won't go through that. I will just mention briefly here on slide 4, the multiplier effect. You see down toward the bottom that each dollar paid out in pension benefits generates $1.19 in total economic activity. And if you do the same calculation based on just the taxpayer contribution, if you will, the employer contribution, the multiplier is around 450. And the reason for that difference is in a mature retirement system such as PERS, over half of the funding for the system is investment earnings, and the employer contribution is a little bit less than a third. And of course, the member contributes the 9% as well. This is a slide that shows our total system membership. It compares active retirees over the last, active members over the last 10 years, as well as retirees. You see that the last 10 years or so, the number of actives has continued to decline, and the number of retirees has grown and increased. And at the top, you see that total membership, which is what I referenced as the 10% of the state's population. And of this, the large majority comes from the public school system. You see that in the blue at around 41% of our active membership, which is around 62,000. And that comes from the public school system. And a lot of that large number, of course, would include teachers that we're talking about today. And then as far as the benefit, it's much like it sounds and much like we talked about earlier. It's a defined benefit, and you have a service credit factor times your average compensation, and that gives you your maximum annual benefit. And we'll just talk on the maximum option for now. We do have, as some of you may know, several options available at retirement. They should be equivalent from an actuarial perspective, but it would allow you to choose an option. Say a popular option is, I think, option 2, which would allow you to receive a slightly reduced benefit, but then upon your death, your beneficiary would continue to receive the same amount. So there are different options. I believe we have 7 base options, and then the PLSO, which is the partial lump sum option if you're eligible. And that's available in our handbooks and on our website, and we could talk through that, at your convenience. But you have a service credit factor. And as you can see here, it's basically 2% a year, up to 25 years or 30 years, depending upon when you were hired. And then it's 2.5% each year for every year above 25 or 30, depending upon when you were hired. And that changed in 2011, as you can see on the slide. And then you take that and you use that toward your average compensation. And the average compensation is basically the high 4. You've probably heard the term high 4. And it can either be the 4 highest fiscal years, 4 highest calendar years, the final 48 months, or a mixture of calendar years and fiscal years that don't overlap. And it also includes your leave payout. Now, unused and uncompensated leave can be used toward retirement, but this is actually the payout, which I believe is limited at 240 hours. But you take the highest 4 plus the leave payment, divide that by 4, that becomes your average compensation. So before I go into the vesting and others, just to give an example, if your average compensation was around 40,000 or was 40,000, you had 25 years, 2% each time, it'd be 50% of that. So your maximum benefit on an annual basis would be 20,000. And of course, to achieve that, you have to be eligible. One step in that is vesting. You have to have 4 years of membership service or 8 years of membership service, depending upon when you were hired. And then to become eligible, it's either 25 or 30 years, and depending upon when you were hired again, or the vested status in a certain age. And again, the vested status will depend upon when you were hired. This is just a slide. Slide 11 shows the same tiers. It's the same. It's just more detail about what I just covered. And I'm certainly happy to answer any questions later. I know, again, I'm between y'all and lunch, and I know that the schedule is, so I want to move forward as quickly as I can. But I'm happy to slow down or address any questions you have now or later. But like I said, this is just more detail to what I presented. One thing I will mention, when you're looking at information from other groups, sometimes they'll combine. We have 4 tiers. Sometimes they'll combine tiers 1 and 2 because they're older and there weren't many changes except for maybe some minor changes on disability. But just keep that in mind if you're looking at information later. And then as far as comparison to other states, I want to spend a little time here as we move on. It really depends. I will say, we have a good benefit. We have a good pension system, a good benefit that teachers and other employees depend on. But when you're comparing it to other states, it's important not to inadvertently mix apples and oranges, because in many ways it really does. It just depends, and it depends on what one is comparing. For example, not all states or teacher systems may participate in Social Security or not. That depends. Also, states are different. My native state of Georgia, there's an employee system, there's a teacher system, there are many county systems. Texas to the west is a large state. They have a separate teacher system. Arkansas has a separate teacher system. Louisiana, I believe, has a separate teacher system. So states are different. Then also, each plan is different. They may have different vesting periods. They may have different service credit factors. It may be 2.15 for each year, or it may be 1.9 for each year. It depends. They may have additional different COLAs or cost of living adjustments. So it really depends. You just have to be careful to look at the details. It depends on what one is comparing or what they're trying to achieve. But three things I'll touch on just briefly here are funded ratio, benefits, and contributions. Trying to respond to the request and speak to the issues relevant to today's hearing. As far as funded ratio, you'll remember I said we were at around 61%. The latest median published by NASRA is the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, I believe is 72.4. So our funding ratio is around 61% and improving, and is below the median though. From a benefit standpoint, certainly we have a good benefit, an important benefit, a benefit that teachers depend on. But I think if you look at other states, especially when it relates to a teacher system, you'll also, if you look at surrounding states, you'll find that those teacher systems in particular have similar benefits as well. And then as far as contributions, from an employee perspective and employer perspective, we're above the median on that, and I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. Before I do, I want to briefly mention MDC, or Mississippi Deferred Compensation. This is a voluntary 457 plan that's available for teachers and others, around 39 or 40,000 participants, about $2 billion in assets. And of course, this is you have lower administrative fees. You have a convenient way from the payroll deduction is tax deferred savings. So just wanted to mention that briefly, as it's an additional option or a voluntary option or benefit for teachers. And as we move into the cost discussion, I want to just remind us of the traditional pension equation, which is C plus I equals B plus E. And that's the contributions plus interest or investments equals benefits plus expenses. And I know today we're talking mainly about contributions and benefits, but it's important to keep that in mind. And this is a slide and a chart that shows the employer and employee contributions. The current employer contribution overall is 17.4%. The board recently voted to retain the 17.4% for FY23. And then the employee or member, in this case, teacher contribution, is 9% and has been around 9% or has been 9% since around 2011. Now this one's going to get down in the weeds a little bit from an actuarial standpoint, but I want to talk about it because I know some of the prep work involved, the benefit and the cost structures. We're going to talk about normal cost and unfunded liability. And this slide attempts to explain that. I'm going to start first with the unfunded. When you hear unfunded, that's the unfunded liability, the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, but you may hear that reported on from time to time. That's basically the difference between what you have and what you need from an actuarial standpoint. For PERS, it's right now around 19 billion. And then you have normal cost. And the normal cost, and actuary looks at this each year and analyzes this in our valuation report. But the normal cost, think of an active employee accrues future benefits each year. And the annual cost of that is called normal cost. And in order to calculate that, the actuary takes into a variety of assumptions, investment experience, investment assumptions, inflation, mortality rates, things of that nature to create the normal cost. And in paying for that, as you see at the bottom, the entire member's contribution, the 9% goes toward the normal cost. Right now, as our last val, the normal cost was 10.34%. So the entire 9% of the member contribution goes toward that. And then in breaking down the employer contribution, 1.34 of the employer contribution goes to pay the normal cost, and the remainder goes to unfunded. So in considering the cost, you have two parts, the unfunded and the normal cost. The normal cost is basically the cost this year for those benefits that the actives are accruing. The entire member contribution goes toward that. It's a shared responsibility with the employer, and the remainder of the employer cost goes to the unfunded. And then I think my last slide just compares these rates to the median. Again, this is something from NASRA, which is the National Association of State Retirement Administrators. This shows the median contributions rate. The employee contribution rate is down at the bottom in the red, the employers at the top in the blue. This shows with Social Security and without Social Security. The one probably most relevant to Mississippi is the one on the left because we are a Social Security state. And so the median of the last one that's published, 6.25%, compares with our 9% contribution rate. And up top, the 14.7 compares with our 17.4% contribution rate. And with that, I hope that is some useful information for today. And I really appreciate the time and chance to be here. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. A question. Do we have teachers now that have retired that have come back to teaching? Do we allow for that? Is that possible? If not, what can we do to allow for that if that's something the legislature wants to do?
Sure. Excellent question. Right now, they can come back subject to certain restrictions. And it's basically half time, half pay, or no more than 25% of their average compensation. And for teachers, you have to make sure and have the appropriate break in service that's outlined the details in our regulation. In other words, you can't just take the summer off, so there's a path now for a teacher that is retired to come back to work with limitations. But that's certainly been a topic of late, and to go ahead and expand it a little further, if one wanted to change that and be able to come back full time, or because it's come up in the past as it relates to teacher shortages and things like that. And the short version of that is based on existing Mississippi law combined with complying with IRS requirements. You can't do it, and a law change would be required.
So the state law needs to be changed, but even if we change, the IRS would not allow for it?
Well, the IRS we could find a way, most likely, if the state law is changed, to comply with the IRS. The longer version of that is, from an IRS standpoint, it's something called CODA, which is cash or other deferred arrangement, and it has to do with these pre-tax contributions. The part in Mississippi law right now that it applies is, as you may know, a person can return to active service. So as the existing, which may be a good thing, but so the existing law in allowing one to return to active service, once you were to create something else that gave them the ability to come back full time, you create this choice, and that's where you potentially run afoul of the IRS requirements. But depending upon how state law could potentially be modified, it may be something that could be addressed. I would think that it could be done to satisfy the IRS.
Okay. The way our retirement plan is now, do you think it's a useful tool in recruiting teachers or people to become teachers? And if not, what can we do to fix it? Or what can we do to improve on the retirement plan to make it more of a tool in recruiting?
Sure. Well, one, just to be real clear today, I want to make sure that today, as PERS, we don't have any recommendations per se, but certainly want to be available to answer questions, be a resource, and to discuss this with you. And I think it depends on what one's trying to achieve. I mean, we obviously have a good system, a system we're thankful for, and one that is important to so many people. And I think it does play a large part in recruiting and retaining teachers and others. But it also depends upon what you're wanting to look at. I know, and a good way to look at that would be at other states and what they may do, what their contribution rates may be, or what their benefit structure could be. Again, not recommendations from us today, but just as a resource to you. Other states sometimes, maybe not so much teacher plans, but other plans, you may have a hybrid. You could have a hybrid, which is a combination of a DB plan and a DC component. Some of the states have cash balance plans, which is basically a defined benefit light. You accumulate a certain amount, then it can be amortized at retirement. Or there could be potentially a new tier 5 with a different cost structure. Again, those aren't recommendations from us today, but just to give you some ideas in response to your question. It just really depends on what one's trying to achieve.
Okay. Well, thank you, sir. Open up for questions to any member? Okay. All right. I think you're going to get off easy, sir.
Good deal. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks again.
I guess
Appreciate
it's
the time.
better to go before lunch.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Higgins. I appreciate it. At this time, I think we'll recess until 1:30 for lunch. Thank you.